they have used Venezuela as an operating base to expand influence throughout Latin America. But on the one hand, yes, President Trump and the administration said, we're doing this because we're worried about that influence. And on the other hand, he goes out and makes those statements about Denmark and Greenland that totally undermines the relationship in a way that empowers Putin and Xi. So I think it's very dangerous. We are very concerned. One of the things that the minority in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has done since the Trump administration took over is to put out a report on what the elimination of USAID, which was our foreign assistance program, has meant in terms of empowering China around the world. The effort to withdraw the United States from multiple international organizations, whether the effort to reduce influence at the UN. Now, I will say, and when we were talking about checks and balances, one of the positive things that's happening is that as members of Congress, we put back a lot of the money for those organizations, the dues that we owe the UN, as an effort to say, this is the policy we want, not the policy of the Trump administration. But there are real ramifications in terms of empowering China. I think what happens in Ukraine is going to have a significant impact on what happens with Russia. I think the best, in my mind, the best way to deal with China and Xi is to defeat Putin in Ukraine, because that puts a brakes on what China's thinking about, and it also would have a significant impact on Russia, as Russia's looking at the Arctic and expanding influence in places. So I've been arguing for that, for more support for Ukraine, for long-range weapons during the Biden administration, actually going all the way back to Obama when Ukraine first invaded Crimea. The fact that we were not willing to give them lethal weapons, I thought was a real mistake. And it was a mistake, actually that was a mistake not just of the United States, but of Europe. So we've got to, I think we've got to recognize that there is a connection between all of these things. And I haven't talked to one intelligence person or one member of the military who hasn't said that China is watching what happens in Ukraine, and that if Putin is successful there, that empowers Xi to think about going into Taiwan and other expansionist interests that they have. So it's important to for all of us to recognize those connections.
So certainly not an end game that we are in with the question of Greenland. It's potentially just a beginning. I will take more questions from the audience. Yeah. I'm sorry to make you run up and down a bit, but I would like to take some of our students. Yeah.
Hi, I'm studying political science here at the university, and I'm also a worker at the rector's office. So I do quite a bit of my time here at the university. I feel that the entire scene involving Trump, Vance, and Zelensky was the first major shock from this time's Trump administration to the world order as we knew it. And then there's this whole situation with Greenland, which I also see as a potential breaking point within the Republican Party. You, as a Democrat, do you sense a growing divide inside the Republican Party between those who support NATO and Europe and those who are more critical of these alliances? And do you think this internal divide could shape Trump's administration and actions going forward, potentially actually pushing him to pull back from this line against Greenland?
Thank you. We'll take one more over here and then come to you. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Gustav. I'm also a political science student at the university. Thank you, Jeanne Shaheen, for being here. My question is primarily about how we rebuild the trust between the American and Danish society. because I hope in some way soon that we can move past this. How do you see that we can keep these bilateral ties open in the future? Thank you.
And we have the last question here.
Hi, Senator Shaheen. My name is Adam. I'm an engineering student at the Technical University, and I want to ask you a question about the armed forces of the United States. You talked about it in the end, but I know that the officers of the United States Armed Forces swear an oath to the Constitution. Do you have any idea of the sentiment in the armed forces regarding all of the situations, both Venezuela, Greenland, and so on? Thank you.
So to start with the divide in the Republican Party, what I think shapes the president's actions probably more than that right now is public opinion. And, you know, it's a democracy like Denmark is a democracy. I spent some time teaching at I didn't teach, but I was the head of the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School at Harvard for a while. And one of the things I used to say to students is, I think democracy works. Doesn't always work the way I want it to. And that's one of the challenges in a democracy. But I do think that this White House is looking at the polls, and they're seeing that the American people are not happy. So to what extent will more of my Republican colleagues be willing to stand up and say they disagree with the president? It's not clear, but we are seeing some breaks in the united front. Last week, the House, one of the fights we've been having, and we had a government shutdown that went on for a very long time, the longest in history, and it was over whether we were going to continue to help people pay for the cost of health insurance. Healthcare is a big issue in the United States. And one of the things that happened last week is that 17 Republicans joined the Democrats in our House with something called a discharge petition to pass an extension of help for people who were losing their health insurance. We had 5 Republicans join us in passing a war powers resolution last week. Now, 2 of them flipped under pressure this week, but it shows that we're beginning to see some divides that are affecting people because, as I said, we've got midterm elections this year, and conventional wisdom is that Democrats are much more likely to take the House than Republicans. And so that gives people in the Republican Party pause, and they're looking at what people are concerned about very carefully. I think we've all got to work at rebuilding trust. You know, that's one reason I'm here. It's one reason our delegation is here, because we're concerned about what's happening as the result of the president's rhetoric. And we want to say very directly to you in Denmark, to you in Greenland, we think this relationship is really important, and that's why we're here. And we got to think about other ways to continue to do that. I think as young people, you're really important in that. One of the things that distresses me about the changes to foreign assistance in the United States is that so many of the exchange programs have been defunded by the administration. Now we're trying to put some of that money back in, but that's one of the best ways to encourage relationships going forward is getting to know each other. I'm a big fan, I don't know if any of you have participated or you know anything about FIRST robotics competition. Is anybody here part of, it's a global effort to get young people engaged in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math. And it started in New Hampshire with an entrepreneur named Dean Kamen, who invented the insulin pump and the Segway. Some of you, particularly you science and technology students, may have heard of Dean. But the idea is, how do we get kids as excited about STEM subjects as they are about sports. So it's this game. And now it's gone global. There's a global competition, and students from countries all over the world send teams, and they compete. This year it's going to be in South Korea. Last year it was in Greece. But what better way to rebuild trust and relationships than for people to get to know each other? So I understand that this is not going to happen overnight, because once that trust is broken, it takes a while to rebuild it. But it's on all of us to help do that. The final question was about sentiment. That's all I wrote down. What was the rest of that question?